Welcome to the Daily MBA, where business wisdom is served fresh and fast, straight from one of the top MBA programs in the world. I'll give you summaries of my lectures and readings, as well as the most important insights gained from an MBA, so you can apply all of this knowledge in every business. Let's get started. In today's episode, I'm going to start introducing macroeconomics. And this is going to be one of my favorite topics throughout the entire MBA, just because I think it's extremely relevant to everything that has happening. And as my professor said, there's not a better time to start learning about macroeconomics than now, because you can see the examples of fiscal policy, monetary policy, inflation, recession. All of these concepts are probably things that either we lived in a recent time with COVID or that are happening right now with the interest rate hikes. So don't worry if you don't understand much of what I'm talking about, because in this first episode about macroeconomics, I want to start explaining all of the basic concepts. So if you already are familiar with macroeconomic concepts, you can watch this as a review, but if you're a beginner, hopefully this will set up all the bases so you can start talking and learning about macroeconomics in the future and sounding a bit more as an economist when you're talking with your friends. So let's break it down. Today I have the 10 most important concepts that you need to know in macroeconomics, and one weird thing is going to be that most of them are going to work with abbreviations. So you have to remember the letters and what they're going to mean in the economic context. The first and most important concept that you need to remember is GDP, which comes from gross domestic product. What gross domestic product, or GDP, is all of the goods and services that are produced in a country in 1 year. And so the keyword that we're going to use in our heads for identifying this concept is going to be location, because we care about where are all of the goods. It doesn't matter who produced them, but the amount of goods that are inside a country. And so there are basically two methods to calculate it. The first one is going to be the incomes-based approach. And for this one, you're going to add up all of the incomes in the economy. So if I am in Colombia, I'm going to be adding up all of the money that all of the Colombians earned during that year, and that would give me the GDP of Colombia. If I'm in the US, it would be the same, but with the US salary. So if you just add up all of the income that people received, and so careful here because I'm saying all of the income, it doesn't necessarily mean it's only salary, because you can get other types of income. So you're just going to add all of the money that people received in the economy over that year. That is one method to calculate it. And that sum is going to equal the same amount as if you had the expenditure-based approach, which is the second method for calculating GDP. And this one is going to be the most common one for doing analysis, because here you're going to have 4 components. You'll have consumption, which is usually represented by a C. You'll also have investments, which is represented by an I. You'll also have government expenditure, which is represented by a G. And then you'll have the fourth element, which is the trade balance. So this is going to be exports minus imports. Exports is going to be represented by an X, and imports is going to be represented by an X. But you want to have the total amount that entered. So this would be basically C plus I plus G plus X for exports minus M from imports. And all of that would add up the same as the incomes-based approach. So these 5 letters that I just mentioned are going to be crucial for determining GDP, and we're going to be using it in further models. So you can try to remember them. First, consumption is going to be what people are consuming in the economy. Investments is going to be mostly about businesses. What are all of the businesses investing into the future? Then government expenditure, it's going to be all of the things that the government is creating. And then just exports minus imports. So 5 elements that you have to remember, and they're going to be key components of the GDP. Now let's go on to the second concept that I want to talk about, and it's going to be a bit similar, but it's GNP. And so GNP stands for Gross National Product. And this one is going to be different, gross domestic product from gross national product, because here it's all of the goods and services produced by a country, but keyword would be ownership. So we wouldn't care where the product is, but who made it. So let's assume, for example, if I'm talking in the Canadian context, I would care about the Lululemon that's being sold in the US or in Mexico and that was produced by Canada. So it's going to be also all of the goods that a country is producing but are being sold elsewhere. And that's why GNP is more about ownership. And so for calculating this, you usually take the GDP that you already had. You're going to add to that all of the profits from national production abroad. And then you're going to take from that profits in the country from foreign production. So it's going to basically add all of the stuff that you're producing outside. And then you're going to be taking away everything that you didn't produce, but that's inside your country. So this would be mostly imports. So it's relatively easy to calculate. Whether you want to have GNP higher or GDP higher would depend on every country. But the thing would be one of them, it's about ownership. The other one would be about location. Okay, now, third concept is going to talk about the real versus nominal things. And what does this mean? There's an equation called the Fisher equation, which is going to be key for this third element, which states that the real rates are going to equal the nominal rates plus the inflation. And this, it may sound weird, but every time I'm talking about GDP, I may talk about real GDP or nominal GDP. When I'm talking about interest rates, I could talk about real interest rates or nominal interest rates. So this Fisher equation, you can plug it into many other macroeconomic concepts, and that's why I believe it's one of the key ones that you should learn. And so real is usually going to be the one we consider when we are comparing GDP or GNP between the years, because inflation may increase with the values without an increase in quantity. And so our keyword here would be inflation, and I'm mentioning this so you are aware that there are going to be two measures of most of the economic things that you see. You have to know if that counts inflation in or if it doesn't. Now, fourth concept that I want to mention is going to be portfolio investment. And so this type of investment is going to consist of stocks and bonds. And the keyword that we can associate it with in our minds is going to be short-term investments, because through portfolio investments, you get dividends or you get capital gains, and these investments can be sold off quickly, and they are usually considered as short terms. This is going to be related to all of the investment accounts that a country will have. I will go deeper into this in my next episodes. But you want to see if the money that's coming into a country, it's going to be portfolio investment, which would mean it's going to be in there for the short term. But then the other type of investment that a country could receive would be my fifth key concept, and it's direct investment. So direct investment would be either building up or buying a business that's already in the country. And so direct investment is usually seen as a long-term investment in the country's economy, and is likely suitable for large corporations, institutions, and private equity. And of course, it's more attractive because our keyword here would be long-term. So someone is putting in their money in that country for the long term, not just for getting capital gains or something in the short term. So we're going to differentiate these two types of investments, and that's why I consider both of them part of my key concept list. Now, the sixth concept that I would like to talk about, I briefly mentioned it in the GDP thing, but it's the balance of trade. And so this is going to mean exports minus imports. And balance of trade is usually represented by an X. So remember I told you we could have 5 letters. Technically, you could only think about it as just being 1 letter, because in balance of trade, you are already taking the amount of exports minus imports. And this is going to be a key measure because it will show the openness to international trade from a country. And this is extremely important. We'll see it further in my episode about currency exchange. But openness to trade is going to be crucial because it's one of the ways that a country can grow and therefore can increase the well-being of the people that are in the country. So there are basically two ways that a country can keep maintaining the market share in the global economy, and those are going to be either efficiency and lower costs, so offering products that are cheaper, but you're still making a profit out of it because you have lower costs. Or the second way would be improving quality and branding. So even though your product may be expensive, if it's good enough, people are going to buy it. So our keyword here for remember this concept would be openness. And now my seventh concept would be the fixed exchange rate. And this one, I'll also be talking about it a little bit more, but when you hear fixed exchange rate, it will mean that you're pegging your currency to another. And so this is going to happen when a company is going to fix their exchange rate to another currency. And therefore, it has a lack of control over monetary policy and their own currency. And even though you might be feeling a bit lost at this point, if I'm mentioning all of these things, I just want you to remember that fixed exchange rate is going to be either when you're adopting another country's currency. So, for example, Panama uses the US dollar, and they are not the US, so they have a fixed exchange rate. But this may also be seen in Belize, for example, because the Belize dollar, it's always going to be $2 in Belize equal $1. So even though it's not the exact same currency, they did peg it into the US dollar. So anytime that a country is doing this, this will bring important implications that I will be talking about more in my further episodes. But I wanted to mention this concept because it's going to be crucial and very important in today's economy. And so the eighth concept would be the opposite of that. It would be the floating exchange rate. And this is going to mean that it's supply and demand based. So this is how usually currencies work, unless it's pegged. So the rate will be determined through the private market, either by supply and demand factors that I'll be explaining later. But what this means is that they will be self-correcting. So the differences in supply will be automatically corrected to match the differences in demand. And it's usually going to be way more flexible. So if you want to tie one keyword into this, it would be flexibility. The concept number 9 that I want to mention is the current account. And this is something that I'll be talking more in my next episode, but it's a way of recording the transactions that you have with the rest of the world. The current account may be positive, which would mean you have a surplus and the company is basically a net exporter, or it may be negative, which means you would have a deficit and it means you are a net importer. And so what this current account really wants to measure is what is your relationship with global transactions? So how much international money is moving through that country? And then lastly, my other concept is going to be savings and investments. And why do I put these two together? Because they are going to mean the same in economics. So savings will always equal investments, and we'll see the rules behind this. But right now, you could think about it as just savings will have many different parts. Savings includes the savings that you have in the private sector, savings of the government, and the savings of the rest of the world, we could say. And if you consider the national income identity, which is the GDP, basically, savings in the economy are going to be equal to investments. Okay, so keyword here will be these two words, that savings always equal investments. So let's do a very brief overview of all of the concepts that I just mentioned. They were GDP, GMP, Fisher equation, portfolio investment, direct investment, balance of trade, fixed exchange rate, floating exchange rate, current accounts, and then savings and investment. So I hope after listening to this episode, you already have an overview of what I'll be explaining in my further episodes. and you can have a more clear sense of what you will be learning about in macroeconomics. But I can assure you that it's going to be very relevant for today's conversation in the business world. And so I hope you can give me a review if you like this episode and share it with your friends that also want to learn about business. I'll see you in my next episode.